welcome to Q and Author. I am Scott, and I am joined by Scott, or SD Miller.
That's right. Yeah.
So W Scott's
SD
W
Miller. Yeah.
Fun.
But we'll go by Scott today. It's weird to be calling somebody by their initials in a
Right? Yeah, I have the same.
conversation. Yeah.
It's a bit
How
awkward.
are you? Yeah.
I'm
Unless
great.
there's,
I'm
unless it's a well, I was gonna say unless it's like CW on Mythic Quest. I aspire to be as good as authors. Yeah.
not selling rotisserie chickens.
Yeah, exactly.
I am lucky enough. I have your book right here in my hands, which is so Nekonikon Punk Control Break. Did I say
Nekonikon.
that? I didn't. Oh my god, that sounds so much better when I
Nekonikon Punk, yeah.
Nekonikon. Jeez. Yeah, it sounds way better when you say it. So Nekonikon Punk Control Break.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
And I can't hold yours up. Like I said, yours is in the mail. I could hold my phone up perhaps with the email confirming that I bought it, but
I believe
it's
you.
coming. Yeah.
I appreciate it. All right, so Q and author five questions, zero preparation. Would you like to kick us off today?
Sure. I have to get my phone up. I have my questions written down. I was like Sean Evans here. I was doing some research into you. I was trying to find
Are you doing
some
the
good
deep
questions.
dive?
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to start though. I'm going to ask you because I think maybe we want to preface here. I think the plan is that we haven't read each other's books yet, so we're going to do a
Yeah,
second one after you read the books. So I tried to I'm not asking too many questions about Criminal Cove specifically, as much as I really looking forward to reading it. And as I said, I love the pitch. But now I want to write. I just want to ask some general questions because this is
sure.
also we've spoken on Insta, but this is our first conversation. So I want to know for you, what's the key difference between writing for films and writing a novel?
Oh my goodness. So writing for film is interesting because I typically with the short films that I've made, and then I'd written I think two features. Really, I was generally apart from the features, I was writing stuff that I knew I would shoot. So I didn't put a lot of like descriptors or anything into it. You kind of very base bones when you're like, well, I know what it's going to look like, so I don't need to put a camera direction in because I'm going to be the one shooting it.
Right, fair
So
enough.
my scripts tended to be fairly dialogue heavy, like a lot of chit chat because you kind of shoot to your budget, right? So they didn't have the budget for explosions and gunfights and stuff, so a lot of it was people sitting around talking. When going to the novel, it was sort of like, oh, I can destroy Washington D.C. and it doesn't matter. I can,
Right,
I can.
right,
I initially started it with that, like, how do I possibly film this? And then the freedom of the novel was like, oh, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. How am I going to pull this off? It's not my problem.
right, right. Yeah,
So
I
that was
think the
my
original
hardest.
version of 12 Angry Men had an alien invasion scene, but then they're like, oh, we can't have the budgets, keep them in the courtroom.
Yeah, exactly. Which and it worked. That was it played to its strengths.
Yeah.
So that was the weirdest hurdle for me was trying to get past how do I make it. And the feature script that I'd written was very much a sort of low key Australian western, which did well
Oh,
but never got made. So the script got a little bit of attention. I won a couple of awards for it, and then it never got made, which
hmm.
was a shame. But it was it's there for a novel one day, right?
Yeah. Well, I also think like an Australian Western, I mean, it lends itself very well, right? Like a Western set in Australia.
Yeah, I mean,
You got the
we
terrain,
had we had
the
a
culture.
colonial past of settlement and expansion, which is not as I guess prestigious or well written about as the American expansion. But personally, like cyberpunk's been going through a little bit of a pop culture resurgence as of like probably 2020. I guess we've all been locked in our room with our tech for the last 5 years at one point or another with no escape. Or I could be completely ignorant and I've just like missed the boat on the cyberpunk thing. But what drew you into that as a genre?
Good question. I didn't set out to write cyberpunk, although just to the point, I think we all got locked in with our tech, but I think also CD Projekt Red had Cyberpunk 2077, which didn't launch the best, but then after a while, actually they did pretty good with it, and it turned a pretty good game. So I think that really helped with the popularity too. And then Edge Runners came out on Netflix, and like that whole CD Projekt Red kind of, I think, kind of it very much owns, at least the corporate side owns cyberpunk these days, or a large share of the pie. Um, but like what drew me to it? like I said, I didn't set out to write cyberpunk. I set out to write a dystopia. I started with my setting, and my setting was like is like I studied history, so I kind of like wanted to kind of play into some themes of colonialism and capitalism in it, and so I was thinking dystopian, right? But then what I ended up creating with my world was that like a near future where corporations have seceded, like they've established their own like city states on the Pacific Northwest of America, and they seceded from the United States, and there was a war called the Great Secession, and this is in the aftermath of it, and these city states have been established, and Nekonikon is one of these city states. So then, once I had this sort of like near future dystopian city, then you kind of like you don't get forced into cyberpunk, but you very much like those kind of ideas of the the neon and the tech and so on sort of all kind of come into it very well. And I knew I wanted to have some kind of like hacking thing pretty early, and so then like cyberpunk themes just kind of came out of it. I already was talking about corporate greed and how capitalist colonialism's forces work together. That's even why I chose the name Nekonikon. It's, believe it or not, a real place. And so like just it all kind of just grew out of like the themes I wanted to explore. And once I had the setting, it just kind of made sense to be cyberpunk.
Nice. Yeah, it lends itself, I think, as a genre to that, like overwhelming, overbearing corporations. I think even Blade Runner, like, feels you feel that
Yeah.
capitalist presence.
Yeah, what I was kind of thinking is like imagining I have a kind of a post about this on my Substack, but I was thinking about like the cost of living right now, housing for people, especially not so much like I'm 44. I have this I'm in my basement of my house. I have my house and whatnot, but the world we're leaving young people not so much, right? The cost of living and cost of housing these days, and I started thinking like like in the past they used to have those like townhouses that were built by the local company in a small village, right? And like what would happen if like a tech company was like, we're going to attract the best engineers and we're going to build apartment buildings right on our complex, right with our headquarters. And you can get a job here and you get a place to live. As long as you work here, you get a nice apartment. And like, who wouldn't take that deal in this like near future? And then, okay, how much of your privacy are you going to give up to keep this, right? Because we already give up lots of privacy for like Google Maps and stuff like that, right? And just incremental. Okay, now the companies are kind of like they have their people that are more loyal to them than they are necessarily to their nation, and then
Yeah,
the nation comes in with antitrust laws or other laws, and they don't want to follow them, and so I kind of have a prequel in my mind about how I want to write sort of how we got to it, but I want to finish the 3 book kind of series first. But yeah, anyway, that's kind of where I was coming from with the setting. So this is kind of related to my first question, but I kind of wanted to ask you, and you might have already answered this a bit with the being more free, but I did want to ask you, like, what motivated you to take the jump from film to writing a novel? Like, I kind of looked through your Instagram history. I know you've been working on the novel for like a good like 3 years or so. You'd done some films before. Why the jump from films to writing novels?
I I I'd made a number of short films, and I was working on a fairly decent sized project. So I think we ended up. So it was started as a short film, and it was going to be a pitch for a larger film. So we had like $5,000 budget. We rented a farmhouse. We did the full low key, low budget horror thing. We had just gallons of
Oh,
blood, and we shot this really nice short film that was going to be a pitch for a bigger project. And then we just struggled to get a special effects artist who could deliver to a standard we were kind of happy to. And when you do film, you're so reliant on everyone else. Like I am not a good cinematographer. I freely admit that I am not great at cinematography at all. And I do have I have very little patience as an editor. I'll do it, but I begrudgingly do it. So we kind of stalled on this thing, and I was getting impatient and stuff. So I was like, oh bugger, I'm going to try and do a film that I can do all by myself. I'll shoot it, I'll do the sound, I'll do the editing, I'll write it, and we shot this really silly little short film called Pillow Talk. It's literally two actors playing husband and wife sitting in bed together. literally talking like she's like just like tie me up and like go to town on me, and he's like, can't we just do it the old fashioned way? Like it was this like clash. It was just meant to be a comedy, like them arguing about like sex, and it won like a bunch of awards, and I'm like, this sucks. Like, you have to pull all these people together to try and make something, and I do the stupid little thing, and it like did really well.
Right.
And it was like I got really tired of relying on people and trying to find people that you can work with and that you can trust, and it's tough when you don't have any money, like the film industry, which I mean, people should be paid for their work, absolutely. But when you spend all the money on your cameras, you spend all the money on feeding everybody, you just have nothing left, and it's just hard to get movies going
Yeah.
when you're not like that group of people who are all in it for the love. Like it's just hard. So writing the novel
Yeah.
was just like, I don't have to, I can do whatever I want, and I don't have to answer to anybody, and that's why I kind of shifted from writing screenplays to writing a book, and it felt very liberating and very rewarding to just think about the writing, and that was the reward.
Yeah. Do you got more books in the works that you're thinking about like adopting after Criminal Cove?
Oh yeah, I've got like just a stack of like script ideas that will. I'm like, great, this is just easy. I just turn these into books instead of
Nice.
trying to. And you know, I love many genres. Horror is definitely my favorite, and yet I've had very little success, even film wise, getting horrors going for me. But it'll be fun. I've got a few. Yeah, a few that I'm working on one at the moment, so we'll get there.
Oh, okay. Right
Yeah,
on.
music plays a massive role in my process, and I'm going to take a guess and say that it does in yours as well. And I thought it was so awesome flicking through this, and I was showing my wife that you've kind of got like the classic kind of wine menu at the
That's
start of
exactly
every
what it is.
at the
Yeah.
start of every chapter, where
Pairs well with. Yeah.
each chapter pairs well with, and you've listed a song. I've never seen that before, and I think it's incredibly cool. So where did that come from? I just needed to ask because I saw it and I'm like, that is the sickest idea. Because obviously, every time I write like an action scene, I'm like, well, that's obviously Thunderstruck by ACDC.
Yeah.
Like,
You got the song. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So once I realized I was writing cyberpunk, because I didn't realize it until I was a few chapters in. I one thing that's kind of always bothered me. I've always loved. I mean, I'm a big cyberpunk fan. Like I read Neuromancer and in university, and Neil Stevenson is a big. I've read a lot of his stuff, and anyway, but like once I realized I was writing cyberpunk, one thing that's always bothered me about the depiction, especially more modern cyberpunk, is that the word punk is being used there very aesthetically. Like it's like, oh, they got mohawks and earrings and tattoos, but like to me, like I'm a kid of the '90s. So there's a guitar back there because I was a big grunge head back then, and like punk means something to me, and it's not just that, and so I really wanted to like in uh put the punk in cyberpunk. I
yeah,
really want
yeah,
to reclaim part of it. So every song is a punk song purposely. And so I started actually the first like this is my debut novel. It's the first one I've written, and I started writing, actually choosing lyrics from the songs and putting those at the start of the chapters, and songs that kind of fit. Like the first one's "Bad Brains Lie Against I." There's a lyric in there about like everyone will always in a test to achieve something. Everyone will always pursue themselves. And there's a test that the main character faces in that first chapter. So there's just like that. And I got about 4 or 5 chapters in, and somehow learned like, oh no, you can't do that. That's copyright infringement. You're gonna get sued. Like, oh, okay. Like that sucks. I like the idea. So I anyway, the one time the idea came, well, you can't copyright names, and you can put the names of things on, and that's not an infringement. And I contacted a lawyer to make sure I was in the clear there. And there's trademark stuff, but it's not like a copyright thing, and you're okay to name things. um and so then the idea of the wine pairing list came, and so like, oh, I'll just pair the song with it. So I just kind of went back and deleted my quotes and put pairs well with, and I just started doing that. But the great thing about that for me is that, like, I got a pretty busy job. I'm a vice principal at elementary school, and a pretty busy one. And so I only get to write, maybe in the evenings once or twice a week, and then I get to really write one of my weekend days. As a family day, and then there's a day that's I'm gonna write. So I get to write like really sit down, no distractions, write good session once every 6, 7 days. And so the songs kind of became a nice shortcut to get my head back in the space. It's been 6 days. Okay, where am I? Generally, what I would do is I would like reread the previous chapter that I wrote last week. Try to do about a chapter a week, and edit it, fix things. Go, oh God, what was I thinking? And do all that stuff, and then listen to the next song that's in the pairing, and kind of like, right, that's where, and you're kind of like in the zone, and you're back to it, and it became very much the soundtrack of the. It doesn't just pair well. It was what I was listening to when I wrote that chapter.
Nice.
Every week was kind of. So
Yep.
I got a question for you about Australia, and this comes from. So I'm a huge fan of Jim Jeffries.
Yep.
So I'm Canadian myself, but Jim Jeffries is an Australian comedian, and one of the things he says, I've heard him say before, that really bugs him about North Americans, I'll include my Canadian selves in this, is like an Australian stereotype, like put another shrimp on the Barbie, and he like goes this whole thing about like we don't call them shrimp, they're prawns. Like no one's ever
Yeah.
heard of a shrimp. It's not. So I was gonna ask you, is there any like stereotype or expression that North Americans use that just bug you, and you want to like set the record straight for Australia?
Um, not in media at large. I think we did a lot of damage to ourselves with Crocodile Dundee.
You haven't been on walkabout?
Yeah, no, never. I don't even like going near bush, let alone. It's not quite as dangerous as I think Americans seem to think. Like I'm not fighting off snakes and spiders, although it's happened to to I think every Australian, but it's not a daily occurrence.
Okay, fair. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if anything, I think the America is as sort of in stereotyping us and stuff has sort of missed an opportunity. I think we're actually much worse than is presented in the media. There is like a huge sort of we call them bogans or gronks or which is like I guess the Australian version of it. I guess what would be a hillbilly like. And we do have that a lot because I live in Western Sydney, which is sort of like people from the city would be like, oh, out there. Ugh. So
Okay.
it's something I do have to encounter, and we're actually like the sort of the bogan Australian can be quite an aggressive creature to come across. So there's like nasty aspects of Australian culture and society that aren't like talked about, or I guess haven't been made fun of by Americans yet.
Okay.
And it's like,
Sounds like we
yeah,
need like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre for Australia, like some.
oh yeah,
Was
and
it
we
Bogans?
have like that stuff here. Like there are like Australian like crime TV shows and Australian. There's a fantastic movie that came out called The Dry. It's you'd probably be able to get your hands on it over there because it had Eric Banner in it. It was quite good, and it's this
Oh,
like really kind of filthy Australian outback town where someone is like brutally murdered, and it sort of shows you a really kind of nasty look at that kind of aspect of Australian culture.
The
Like
Dry.
kind of the dry. So it's like a town that
I'll have to
hasn't where
check
it
that out.
hasn't rained for like
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
and they've all gone nuts, and it's fantastic.
Nice.
Or Snowtown, which was a really amazing Australian movie that is probably still the most horrifying film I've ever seen. About the Snowtown murders that we had here, which was very much our Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it was real,
Oh,
involving
okay.
cannibalism, melting bodies in barrels. It was all sorts of demented things, and the movie did a pretty good job of capturing that horror. So that we have that in our culture, but it's just like we're
Huh.
like it's always like the wandering bush weirdos is sort of all we get credit for.
Well, I gotta imagine too that as you're saying that, like I don't, I'm really detached from it, obviously, but I'd imagine that Australia has a pretty decent like film industry, or like because so many great actors are Australian. I mean, like you never. Oh, I didn't know they were Australian. You hear a lot of actors come out of Australia, right?
There are the industry. as a whole, I will say, isn't great, but there are individual films that are incredible.
Mm.
So there are some movies out of Australia that I feel rival kind of some of the best that the Hollywood system has to offer in terms of compelling storytelling and stuff. But we just don't have the like special effects heavy sort of action stuff. It's more drama things like Animal Kingdom, which I know was made into a very popular American TV show, but the Australian film
Oh,
that is based on is incredible.
okay.
Yeah, The Proposition, incredible. We've got some. There are some really amazing Australian films, but I will quickly throw out before I throw my entire culture under the bus. And I was just thinking about it. I'm like, all the Bogans are going to hate me for saying they're bad. We have terrible we have a terrible conservative movement here too. So they're terrible as
Listen, we have that everywhere. We have that here in Canada, and we have the bogans too. We just don't call them that.
Nice, nice. Has being a teacher influenced your writing at all, or has writing influenced your teaching at all?
I'm gonna have to go mostly the other way. Teaching influence in my writing. Sorry, writing influence, teaching influence my writing. Yeah, sorry, I said the right way.
Nice.
Mostly because I don't teach really anymore. I'm an administrator now, so since I've started really writing nonfiction, I haven't been a teacher, and I'm actually administrator at an elementary school. But when I was a teacher, I was an English history and philosophy teacher at high school, and yeah, I mean those are all three writing heavy subjects, and you know, especially in literature, but really in all of it, the I always took a lot of care in when I was in university and writing my essays. I used to really like writing my stuff there, and unlike some of my peers, I would write my papers 2 weeks in advance and have them ready and sit on them and go back and edit and really try to make them as well worded and concise and poignant as possible. And I tried to instill that in my students too. So like didn't let them get away with stuff, and I did sort of like try to you try to do the standards thing. You're teaching high school, so you teach them story structures, you teach them like hero's journey. Of course, you talk about archetypes, you talk about but even just in the writing itself, like I used to tell my kids, if you spot an adjective, kill it. If you can say it in 3 words, don't say it in 7 words. And just all those kind of like just good writing rules to kind of keep in the back of your mind, right? And so I think like you just internalize a lot of that over 15 years of teaching it, right? And then I kept up some nonfiction writing as well while I was there. So um I think mostly my teaching has influenced my writing now, because I feel like I've really taken on fiction writing later in my career, and I'm not really teaching it right now. Although I have been asked to teach like to work with some local, doing like a writing workshop thing with some local parents, but I don't think I'm going to charge anything. But like, I get to teach that and have fun with that, but I think it would just be like just kind of hang out and talk about writing, which sounds like a lot of fun.
Cool.
So yeah, all right, I'm going to ask you about Criminal Cove, because I have been avoiding, although I've not been purposely avoiding it, been more just wanting to ask more about you. But I do, we are here to talk about our books a bit. So I was listening to the previous conversation you had, and so I know that one of the ideas of Criminal Cove kind of came out of the Umbrella Academy, right? But where did you lock in on like this idea of super villains being like the in this retirement home? Like why super villains maybe as opposed to like heroes or whatever it might be?
I think I thought about heroes, and it was sort of it just seemed a retirement home. I think is, while there are certainly lovely ones out there, there's certainly more drama to be had in the ones that aren't so lovely. And
Sure.
and if a society that had superheroes, and I suspect if we did have superheroes, we would worship them the way I guess cults of personality and celebrities and politicians are worshipped. You wouldn't want to see
Yeah.
them end up in a kind of shitty place to live. But if it was a bad person, you'd be like, oh, whatever. I don't care if they're getting kerosene baths. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Right. Yeah.
so it sort of was like, okay, well, like a nursing home could metaphor a prison for the
Mm-hmm.
elderly, which is horrible. But unfortunately, if you've ever been in nursing homes, or they're not the nicest places to be a lot of the time. So it was sort of
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, if it was treated as a prison, I think a lot of drama would come from that, and but society at large wouldn't care because
Right.
they're bad people and they deserve bad things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's fair. Although I'm thinking like as you were saying that too, like when you about how like if we really did have superheroes, we'd worship them. And I often said I think like in many ways the boys is one of the most accurate depictions of what superheroes on earth would ever be like, right? And like and in
Yeah,
that, like who is the hero, who is the villain? It's like they're all just awful people.
yeah, they'd all be twisted in some way, shape, or form. And yeah, I
Yeah.
think if once you we will chat once you read the book, the sort of yeah, none of my villains are kind of all deeply misunderstood, and a lot of the heroes
Mm.
of their day were kind of used their popularity to feather their nests.
Okay.
as
Yeah,
you see
yeah.
as you read the book, yeah,
I,
a lot of the line between hero and villain is very blurry. Are there any specific authors? I know you mentioned some earlier, I guess, that influenced your writing. I mean, because cyberpunk has a very prestigious pedigree of science fiction literature. Were there any
yeah.
that stood out to you, I guess, through your writing process?
Um, yeah, and actually, I thanked an author in my acknowledgments, and I don't think he's ever going to read it or care that I thanked him, but I thanked him anyway because he really was the motivation. So I'm a big fan. There's a podcast I listen to. I've been listening to for like uh, forever now, called Kind of Funny. It's a whole group. They're in San Francisco. It's a really good group of guys, mostly guys. But anyway, they have guest hosts on, and one of the guest hosts that comes on a lot is a man named Gary Whitta. Do you know that name?
No.
So Gary Whitta wrote Book of Eli. He wrote.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's his biggest one. He was one of the writers on Rogue One. So he's a film writer, and he comes on. He's also like an editor for like I think it was EGM, like Electronic Gaming Monthly, like way back in the '90s. So he's been a writer and in the video game space, and Kind of Funny is kind of a video game like podcast group, whatever. Anyway, he comes on and guest host sometimes, and he's fantastic. He's just like great, just straight shooter talker, and has no f's left to give. And anyway, he was talking about the process of writing. I used to listen to him talk about writing, but he wrote a book in the pandemic because he was just the where people were working, Hollywood wasn't making movies, and so he was talking about the freedom of writing and kind of what you were saying about how like you didn't have to worry about notes and budget and you could just write whatever you want. So he wrote a book called Gundog during the pandemic, and it's not a cyberpunk. It's actually like it's a sci-fi, but it's a mech sci-fi, like
Oh,
giant
okay.
mechs, and it's a cool book. It's aliens, future aliens have invaded enslaved humanity, and there was a war, and there's this one mech left that this like person who's enslaved kind of escapes and finds, and it's action, and it's a cool book. But I remember reading it, and as I'm a fan, I bought the book and right away. I remember reading and thinking like, this is the kind of book. If I was ever going to write a book, this is the kind of book I want to write. It was like this. It reads like a movie. It's fast paced. It wasn't, and that was kind of one of the things that always held me back as a writer or wanting to write was never being happy with my prose, if that makes sense. Like oh, it's not flowery enough, it's not. And this was just I mean no discredit to him at all because it's a great book, but it was just straightforward and I could just picture it, and I'm like, this is how I would write if I was going to write. And I did have this idea for the book, and I thought, well, there's no time like the present, let's sit down and write. And that's what I did. So I very much attribute the fact that I wrote my book to Gary Whitta's Gundog, which is a great little sci-fi book if you want to pick it up.
Nice. No, that you sold me on it. Like, I was
Mm.
like, I'm going to the bookstore this afternoon. That'll be what I'm
Yeah,
looking for.
giant mechs shooting aliens, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
what's not
You
to
had me.
like? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, I think I have one question left, and forgive me if this one's too personal. But I just had to ask. So I was looking through again, trying to do my research and have a good question and good set. And I was looking through some of your top five, so I saw like top five books and movies, and I will say that you and I have very similar tastes when it comes to books and
Nice.
movies, but and video games. But although you really like Silent Hill too, which is maybe another conversation another time. But I saw one video game stood out, and I'm like, huh, really? Why Doom 3? Like I could see
Okay.
like there's Doom 2016, there's Doom the first Doom. Doom 3 is one of the top five. I've got to hear it. What's up with Doom 3?
It's like a black dog, isn't it? Like it doesn't get as
Yeah,
much attention as its big brothers.
yeah. It's
I
interesting.
I was in high school when that came out, and it was such a big deal because no one had a PC and powerful enough to play it. So it became like mythic amongst all of us. We were like, "Oh my god!" Like because
Right.
it's meant to be like the most frightening thing ever, and I had to wait until it got a release on Xbox to finally play it.
Okay.
And I think it's that other horror aspect of it. Like it is a horror game. It's not the run and gun Doom. I think that's probably why a lot of people were
It's
thrown
very
by
dark,
it.
right?
It is, yeah, yeah. You're like, and
Yeah.
you're juggling your flashlight. You can't hold your gun and your flashlight at the same time, which was terrifying. I
Right.
love the I guess the sort of soft science fiction drawing as well because Doom, like I remember playing it when I was really young, probably too young, and always being confused, always being kind of confused about like the setting because it's like there are
Right.
sci-fi doors, but there's kind of castle-y fantasy elements, and there are obviously monsters and demons, and you have a chainsaw, and this was like a very clear science fiction story with like the gateway to hell, so it blended that kind of like
Mm.
science fiction with the fantasy elements. The monsters look great, like they still look great. The Hell Knight and like their version of the Pinky with the kind of like bull kind of pig nightmare sort of stuff. Yeah, it just always stuck me as like just this fantastic horror game that I really enjoy. I
I
haven't
know
played
it.
in a long time because I think the remasters you torture your gun. You don't have that problem
Yeah.
anymore. Which I'm like, oh, that sort of takes away kind of the horror of it a bit.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I love
That's
Doom 3.
interesting.
I really love Doom 3.
I love that. That's awesome.
Right. You kind of answered my last question earlier. I guess Control Break 2 is something
Control
that
Alt.
is nice.
Yeah. So it's Control Alt is the second book. The third book I have a few different. It's gonna be keys on the keyboard, but I have a few different
Control or
ideas on
Delete.
booting around. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I kind of gotta like. So I know where the story ends. You know,
Yep.
where the three books will end. And the way I write, I guess my process has been I actually in my head I think of like I just mowing the lawn or whatever. You think of like a cool scene, like oh I want to write that scene, and you think about three or four of them, and then you try to figure out how those fit into a three-act structure that makes any kind of sense, right? And I'm like okay, it's trying to piece together. So I know where I want the story to end. I know how I want it to resolve. I know there's some scenes that I got to get to along the way that I know I want to have in there, but I don't have like the full arc of like of the structure written out. If that makes sense. So I and book two is where I thought I was probably going to end Act One. Looks like I'm ending Act Two there, and the way things are going, it might even be Act Three.
Nice.
So it might be more climactic than originally intended in my mind. But I still want to resolve it within three books because I want to go back and write the prequel. So yeah, I don't have. So I know that Control Break. I wanted to, this idea of one breaking away from the control that they have on him, and it's a command. It's an actual command. But Control Alt, I kind of went with there's like plot wise, without spoilers, there's like alternative ways that control is seeping in. There's other ideas and philosophies here, and I also thought, well, I did a bunch of punk music with the first one, I may as well move along the continuum and let's do some '90s alt rock and early aughts
Nice,
alt. So
nice.
so a lot of the music, the pairings in this one are a lot of it's more still punky, but it's like more kind of blending into later alternative, right? So alt was the logical title. The third one, maybe control escape, maybe control shift. We'll see once I have
Oh,
the arc more set how I'm going to get there,
yeah,
what keystroke will make the most logical sense. But they'll all be control something.
cool. I like it. I really like it. Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate your time, Scott. And where can people find your book?
So my website, you can get it there is sdmiller.ca. But you can also just search Nekonikon Punk. It's in Amazon. So either one.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you for joining me for Q and Author, and I look forward to our second conversation when we get around to
Me
reading
too.
each other's books.